Today on Think Like a Leader, I want to talk about leadership at home. And today is a privilege to have Zach Webb from South Africa, actually from Kenya, from the U.S., from South Africa, right here in the studio with me. His parents, about 30 minutes ago, I just interviewed them about baby havens in South Africa. And he has a lot to say about really growing up in a ministry home, growing up in a leadership home, growing up in a missionary home. And that formula, we've all heard the exaggerated stories about pastor kids, missionary kids, ministry kids. And Zach is none of that, what we hear and what we like are terrified of. So, Zach, glad to have you here today in Nashville.
Pastor Steve.
Enjoyed connecting over breakfast this morning.
Absolutely.
And I asked you just last minute, hey, could you sit in front of a camera and let's talk about what your parents did right, and if there's something they did wrong that they corrected, we'll go there.
Absolutely.
And, your parents are good friends of mine. I probably met you when you were a little boy in Joburg and have seen you periodically throughout. But just to start off, you're married, you have an 18-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
And so now you're
18-month-old daughter.
18-year-old. Gosh, yeah, you were 10 when you got married. And you have an 18-month-old daughter.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're looking at what your parents have done. And I think you were number 5 of 7.
Yep, absolutely.
So just to start off, what did your parents do right? They
did so much right.
That you became what you are.
Yeah. I mean, right is a good question. And I think it's something I only got to appreciate a bit later was what was normal to us in our home, in our daily routines. As an adult, I look back and realize it's not normal at all. You know, the routines that they set in a life of ministry, from everything from the people we'd have over to our house to after picking us up from school and then taking us, through to one of the homes and spending the whole day taking care of kids.
Talking about the baby
havens.
Okay.
Baby haven homes. We would spend hours after school there. Originally, the baby home was in our house, and so I grew up with over 100 siblings through the years who being fostered, but they all shared my surname, Webb, last name Webb.
Okay.
And what looking back,
so you have 100 siblings out there somewhere.
Out there somewhere, there are 100 siblings. Yeah, so I'm one of 100.
Yeah, your parents said that earlier this morning that they had fostered. Your dad said 99, and he said that doesn't sound right. We need 100.
We need 100. One more.
One of those typical of your parents. One of those God intervention. Just one more, so it's 100.
Yeah, it was. So we got 100. And that was, it felt normal to me at the time. I was born on the mission field in Kenya. So I was born there, returned back to the States briefly when I was a little kid, 2 years old, and then went to South Africa as a 6-year-old. And so born on the mission field, the mission life of ministry, of ministering to people. Almost once a week, I would move out of my bedroom because there was some visitor from overseas staying there and come back in.
But that wasn't normal. It wasn't just visitors from overseas, because that's fairly normal for ministry people.
Yeah.
But it was also your parents would bring in random abandoned children. I assume they would either take your room over or your siblings. How did that work when people would call and say, there's another abandoned child left? And it's heartbreaking. It's tragic. Kids dropped off at they say kindergarten, I guess, and then abandoned them there.
Never
and then
picked up.
People would call your parents, hey, would you take this child? How was that as a kid growing up? And you never knew if it would be you and your siblings or there'd be 3 more or another one.
That was, that's
not normal.
That's not normal at all. It was normal to us, but there was a couple blessings in that. My parents knew this is what they wanted to do. And so they managed, with the grace of God, to buy a big house, which was helpful.
Yeah.
And there was always, like you said, kids coming in, kids coming out. And I guess which sibling of mine you talk to is going to give you a different view on that.
Sure,
For me, I loved it. I was big extrovert as a kid. The more of us, the merrier. We'd have dinner with 16, 17 people every night of the week, babies and volunteers and everyone. And living that life and loving it. I'm sure some of my siblings got annoyed with it. And so this is probably a moment where they didn't do so well. It took a long time before they realized we had to actually give the family some space, as opposed to the ministry.
Your mom talked about that earlier, how at some point she had to realize the family needs its own house, and then the baby havens started popping up.
They started popping up.
I think there's 9 of them now.
There's a bunch now, and what they did immediately, which I think brought a lot of peace, is they actually made like not physical, but they just made clear lines. They said, this whole half of the house is the babies, the volunteers, the visitors, and at least that half of the house is just for the family. Okay. You guys can be at peace there. There aren't going to be people walking into your rooms, or whatever. We all shared rooms, but that helped in a lot. And I guess there were quick practical things that they did. But still, looking back, I look at being a pastor's kid and a missionary kid. Yeah. And what was normal to me is not normal to everyone else. To spend most of my free time after school and on the weekends in some form of a ministry helping others activity is normal, to me. Yeah. And to others, it's not. And I realized that mostly when I left high school and university, it felt weird to me to think about getting a sort of 9-to-5 job. Okay. It felt weird about getting into the workforce, about, using my degree.
And your degree is accounting.
My degree is accounting, and so I was looking at those jobs. And you won't say this, your dad said you graduated at the top. I did graduate, and I was thankful for that, and did well. But I was looking at getting into the workforce and realized that it didn't match the sort of missional life I grew up with. Yeah. The mission, what I knew to be work and ministering to people, a 9-to-5 job just didn't fit that. And that's what I think it was only later on I started to realize what was normal to me is not normal. Yeah. And I was thinking, how am I as a 9-to-5 job gonna have people in my homes and minister and have people over every night of the week and raise up kids this way and put it all together? And I started to realize my childhood was absolutely extraordinary. It was, there was awesome things happening. And I know, talking to my parents, you can't help but get stories of all the good things that God has done. And those are the stories we would hear every night of the week, about what God did, what child we have now. A new kid would come in, and my parents would just praise the Lord for this wonderful little girl, this wonderful little boy, and this child that was abandoned. Yeah. And seeing that practiced in front of you, and I'm sure this is for all missionary kids and pastors' kids, that normal is so different to the world. Yeah. It's outside of the world. It's not what, the world does. It's not what you do if your parents are big executives and, doing something else, but that just becomes your life, and you love it, and you benefit from it later when you look back, setting up your own family, have my own kids, and realize that I want that level of normal. I want that level of ministry in my life, in my home, in my, not just in my workplace, not just on a Sunday, but I need to bring that into everything.
And that's important, not just on a Sunday. Yeah. And ministry took place in your home. Your parents were elders in the church. Your parents are pastors in a mega church in Johannesburg. And I've been to the church many times, and the other pastors and elders are good friends of mine, and lifelong friends with your parents. But they were church people, they were church leaders, church pastors, but yet Sunday through Sunday, ministries going on in the home and in the other homes as the ministry to orphans and abandoned children outgrew the home you lived in. It started expanding around. And so that's normal Christianity. Yes. But unfortunately, it's not normal life. Ministry was just never ending. And I get that. The 9-to-5, what you watched was 24/7. Yeah. It just never a pause button.
1 a.m. phone calls, and which sometimes can get annoying in the moment. Sure, but that's what I grew up with. This is what it's like to serve the Lord. This is what we're going to call our lives, and we're going to make it work.
This is, I know anybody watching this is very spiritual. And these are hardcore Christian people and all that. But again, you don't talk about yourself this way. But I was talking to Ernie Kruger earlier. For those who don't know Ernie, he was a professional rugby player in South Africa, a friend of yours. Yeah. I maybe sort of a mentor. I don't know.
It was a couple years
Ernie and I were talking earlier, and he was talking about you were a high-level rugby player. Yeah. And your parents have said that as well about your rugby career. Yeah. And that doesn't happen without a lot of work, a lot of time. And I think a lot of people have a hard time thinking, okay, there's a missionary kid, they're doing orphans, but how does the rugby fit in? Okay. And because all of my sons were tennis players, and they all played at the collegiate level in tennis with scholarships and all. And so some missionary people see that as either, how did you have time for that? Because like your parents, my wife and I were busy.
Yes.
And yet there was this we could see the value of sports, and obviously your parents must have. You weren't sneaking off and getting the level of rugby you got to.
No.
What was your parents' view of your athletic career?
Yeah.
And talk about that in a missions context, in a ministry context. And here you are, a top rugby player in the nation in your age groups going up.
I mean, that's a good one. They had to balance that, and I think I remember my dad once saying to me, that the ministry life and the missionary life that we're a part of, we didn't necessarily as children choose to be a part of. I moved over as a 5-year-old. And so they really wanted us to pursue what we wanted to do. I wanted to play rugby. I loved rugby.
Yeah.
I probably annoyed my parents because I found so many rugby teams to play for that I would just go from one practice to the next, to the next, to the next. And there was even a season where they just said, you can go to as many as you want as long as you can walk there. And you can just go to the next team.
Yeah.
And I did. And they sort of let that line be. I know there's a lot of pastors' kids, and this is pretty typical of like a pastor's kids syndrome, or even pastors where they have kids and they want to encourage them, but it can come across as forcing them into be a part of the youth group, be a part of Connect group. You should be in the church life.
As a high-level rugby player, you obviously didn't have a lot of spare time. So how did that work with you, involvement in church versus your athletic career?
For a long time, I was on a Sunday. As a teenager in high school, I would go to church on a Sunday with my parents. They sort of let that as like a rule. Okay. As we go to church on a Sunday. Which was easy to sort of stick to. But other than that, it was only once I left high school and got into university that I started making the decision for myself. I want to be a part of this. I want this to be my family just as much as it is my parents' family to a certain way. And so, but it was really encouraging for my parents that I guess they sort of understood that I need to make that decision for myself. Right. They couldn't force that on me. They couldn't say we have to be a part of all this. Although, of course, I'd come home after long days of rugby practice and there'd be 20 people in the house for some big meeting, or the elders would be there and I'd be all sweaty and dirty and just be like, sorry, I'm leaving, and head out. But they allowed that to happen. And and it was only after high school and in university that I decided I want to really get involved.
Where did you study?
Church
university?
Life. I went to the University of Johannesburg. Okay. So UJ is what we call it. Yeah. I went there, which was actually within driving distance of my parents. Okay. I did that intentionally because I wanted to be able to focus on rugby. And so I didn't need to go to dorms, didn't need to be distracted. Yeah. I was quite competitive in that sense. I wanted to be better than anyone I could be around. And so I got to stay at home. And it sounds
like, according to Ernie and according to your parents, it sounds like you were.
I managed to compete a lot. And I enjoyed that. But for growing up as a pastor's kid, my parents knew that was my passion, and they let us. And it wasn't just mine, it was my brother's as well. I had another brother who played very high level rugby, and then my other brother played rugby all the way through school. And they just knew that was important, and that they needed to allow space for that, fit it in, and not necessarily force all the ministry things onto us, because they had packed schedules.
Right, so
and they had to
as you're putting a lot of time into rugby, you're spending a lot of time with your team and all this. Was there any guilt you felt for doing that versus maybe, I imagine, like my kids, I imagine you missed some youth things. You probably missed some youth camps. You probably missed various things. How did you feel about that? How was that atmosphere?
That's actually quite a good question, because I know my siblings felt some of that. For me, and I can only talk to my personal experience, I felt released enough to not feel guilty about that. Good. There was a few times early on that I had to sort of struggle with that. But I think it was purely through my parents' sort of encouragement of like, and the encouragement was, Zach, this is a rugby career. This is something you have to go for now. And this was in the case of a rugby career. I only had 10 years to get it. And so they were able to release me in that sense of like, go for it. If this is what you want to do it. I remember and then coming to them with questions around the purpose of it and why am I doing this? And does this fulfill God's call on my life? And they just let themselves be the backboards of those questions and encourage me in it, and affirm that the desires I had and the drive and goal I had was not of myself, but this is something God's going to use in my life and use me in, and just encourage me in that space. And so that freed me up from a lot of the pressure of church events and ministry events and being a part of the church community to a certain extent, although I was always a part. I knew most everyone in the church because I grew up
Except
there.
There's one lady I heard you didn't really know. Now, you got to talk about, you married a pastor.
I married a pastor.
She was one of the youngest, I heard, I think your dad said the youngest pastor ever ordained
at our church.
Every Nation Church, Rosebank.
Probably one of them, yeah.
And you guys grew up in the same church together for all these years. You didn't know her.
Yeah.
And it's a huge church, okay? Multiple services. I can understand that with as many people as in the church. But
yeah, so she was like a few years older than me, which was just enough of an age gap growing up that I never got to speak to her. Big church, I knew every single athlete in the church, and she probably knew every single creative person in the church, and those lines just didn't cross very much. Yeah. Until one day, I always admired her. I knew her as Pastor Jesse, or Pastor Jesse.
And you still call her Pastor Jesse, or Pastor Jesse.
Pastor Jesse is what I call her. I always admired her. And there even came a moment in that, just briefly, where my father was asking me about girls in my life and asking me questions. And about a specific girl who wasn't Pastor Jesse, but asked me about her. And I said to my dad in passing, like, I've always wanted to marry someone like Pastor Jesse. Okay. I just admired her. Exactly like her. Exactly like her. I admired her faith, her heart for people, her heart for discipling people. She's raises leaders amazingly. And I said that was a couple years before I actually had a conversation with her, because I saw her on stage. She preached and I knew her, but I just assumed she was way out of my league. And if I ever mentioned her to one of my pastors, I'd be just the devil rebuked out of me. But later on, I did get to meet her, and we were probably engaged within a year and married a year later. And so it did get a part of that. And then even that, that happened but that also all happened as I decided for myself, I want to be a part of this community. Because before I made that decision, I wasn't really trying to get to know anyone in the church. I was a part of a small connect group, but really focusing on my rugby, focusing on being there. And it was once I made that decision that I got plugged in quickly, and got to meet my wife, and got to make lifelong friends who I've had for a long time now. And this has been a blessing in that.
Wow. All right, let me ask you this. When you have an 18-month-old daughter. And so anybody, first child, I think most people are somehow thinking back, and sometimes it's, here's what my parents did, I am not doing that. Hopefully there's enough, here's what they did right. Absolutely. I want to do that. When you look back and go, what are you consciously, there'll be a million subconscious things that you're not even aware you do, that you learn from your parents. Right and wrong for all of us. My sons have learned right and wrong from my wife and I. They're not even aware they're doing it. I'm sure. But when you consciously go, here are the things my parents did, I need to make sure we do that with our daughter. What would those be?
I mean, the broad spectrum of it is, I want the life that we have in our home, our family, the routines we carry, to be ministry-filled, people-orientated, disciple-making norms. I hope that my daughter looks back in college, after high school, whenever, and just realizes that there was so much life and ministry and disciple-making and leader-building that just happened over the dinner table with visitors in our house, that she's able to look like, okay, that actually isn't normal, but it was the norm. And I really desire for her to have that. I think I've spent time with families, outside of church, and their homes are relatively, there's not a lot of life and purpose within the home. Pretty boring. That's a good way to say it. But I want our home to specifically be a place of that. I say our home because there is that impossible to draw a line of having your child be a part of your ministry life, but them not being a part of it. And so I'd like the home she grows up in to carry that, and her to see an experience, but somehow have the freedom to do what she wants to do. And my other kids as well, once I have more, hopefully, that they will have the freedom to take the path that they want to do, to chase after their dreams and desires, just like I got to. But still know a normal that is focuses around making disciples, about being led by the Holy Spirit. My family heavily socially responsible, but Christ-centered. That'll be the norm that they know, and then they've seen it, they've lived it, they know what it's like to be in that life. And hopefully when they miss it, when they're out of it, because they're going to have to make the decision for their family one day that this is what we want to do, that we want to make disciples in everything we do.
Now, you're an interesting to me, an interesting combination of being a high-level rugby player with an accounting degree. Those two don't seem to connect. That's not the normal the normal two pathways.
Yeah.
And you married a pastor, Pastor Jesse. But you're working in ministry with your accounting.
Absolutely.
Talk about that a minute with the church and also with the Baby Havens, with the ministry that your parents are known for.
Yes. So briefly, how that all happened is I was a rugby player and I needed to go to university to play good rugby. And so I picked accounting because it seemed like something fun. I think my brother did it.
Yeah.
And so to me, that felt like, okay, I can do that. I'll just do accounting. Later, I didn't think I would ever use it. I figured I'd be a rugby player for the rest of my life, and I didn't think beyond that point.
Yeah.
But did it, found out I would, actually in doing it, found out I was good at it.
Okay.
And actually enjoyed it. And that's probably why I was able to do well in it in my undergrad and postgrad, enjoyed it a lot. But then, as I said, I left university. I was looking, rugby finished, I was looking at getting into sort of a 9-to-5 workspace. And I did it for a year and pretty much ripped my hair out. I was just depressed at times, angry at others, felt like I was missing this sense of life and purpose in just working a sort of 9-to-5 job for a large company. And then was able to appreciate what I grew up in and the ministry life I did, and had the heart for, I want to make disciples. I want to, have lots of young people. I want to raise leaders. How do I fit that into my life? And so now, as you said, I do carry the balance. I still run as an accountant for the Havens, and I manage all their finances as well as for our Joburg church. And that's a blessing, that it's a skill that I have that I get to use, but it's more purpose behind it because I'm looking at taking care of the orphan and the widow. I'm looking at the church's finances and raising disciples and building a healthy church around it. And so I guess it's a little bit of just God's wonderful hand that He put that in my life at a season I wasn't trying to have it. I wanted to focus on rugby. I love fast pace and high energy everything,
which is the opposite of accounting.
Which is the opposite of accounting.
But your dad did say this morning that since you've taken over the finances, there's accounts that keep accumulating for emergencies that never seemed to be there before.
And so to my wife's pain, I'm really good at saving.
Yes,
which is great for all the ministries I'm going to be a part of.
Perfect. You sound like the perfect combination of being generous and conservative.
Conservative, a good way.
Yeah, that's a
people tell me I just
for
squirrel stuff away. Is what I do a lot.
Excellent. Well done. All right. Thank you for the time here. I'm going to give you the last word. What I'd like you to do is whatever you want to say to anyone who grew up in a pastor's home, grew up in a missionary home, that whole world. What would you say to them, and any pastor, minister, church planter, cross-culture missionary who's raising kids?
Absolutely.
What do you want to say to them?
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. To the kids who grew up in a ministry home, in a pastor's home or a missionary's home, I want to say and encourage you first to follow the desires of your heart. God's put them there. Go for them. God wants to use all the things He put in our heart to glorify Himself and glorify His kingdom. And to all the parents who have kids in ministry, or you have kids who you're raising up as you're doing a life of ministry, is let them be a part. Let them see your life, see the way you live, the way you make disciples, how every day from Sunday to Sunday that you're living a life of ministry, that you're building those around you. And as they grow older, they're going to know that as a normal to them that they actually want to duplicate in their life.